Keanu Reeves was sitting in his quiet home, away from cameras and crowds. His house was simple compared to what people imagined for a Hollywood star. He had made a life where he could feel normal, where no one shouted his name or asked for photographs. That evening, he had decided to invite a few close friends for dinner. Keanu wanted them to enjoy themselves, laugh, and spend time together without the pressure of fame. For him, joy was always in simple things: sharing food, listening to stories, and treating people with kindness. The evening began with soft music playing in the background. Some friends had arrived early, and Keanu greeted them with his usual warmth. He never liked to act like a celebrity. Instead, he spoke gently, always asking about their families, their struggles, and their happiness. He had a way of making people feel that they mattered. To him, a star and a worker were equal. This was why many people who met him never forgot. The experience kindness felt real. In preparation for this dinner, Keanu had asked his small household staff to take a break and hired extra help just for the night. He didn't want to overwhelm his regular workers. The extra staff included waiters and kitchen workers, people who came in only for special events. Most of them were strangers to Keanu, but he treated them no differently from his friends. Before the dinner began, he walked into the kitchen, smiling, and thanked each worker for being there. "I appreciate your help tonight," he said, his voice calm and genuine. The workers, surprised, nodded respectfully. They were used to rich people. Ignoring them, so Keanu's words felt different as the evening moved forward. The house slowly filled with soft chatter and laughter. Guests enjoyed glasses of wine, and the smell of food drifted from the kitchen. Everything seemed perfect. But there was something in the air that Keanu noticed, something small, almost hidden. It was the way a few guests spoke in low tones, laughing louder than needed, giving glances toward the kitchen door. At first, Keanu thought nothing of it. People often joked during gatherings, and he didn't want to interfere with everyone's fun. He believed in letting people enjoy themselves freely. But Keanu was also observant. He had lived long enough to notice when laughter wasn't kind, when it carried a sharp edge. He caught sight of the young worker rushing out of the kitchen with a nervous look on his face, his hands trembling as he carried a tray. Keanu's eyes softened as he watched the boy nearly stumble while serving drinks. The boy smiled weakly, but behind that smile was fear, the kind of fear that came from being judged or ridiculed. Keanu stayed calm. He greeted the boy with a small nod, hoping to give him a bit of comfort, and then returned his attention to his guests. Still, deep down, Keanu sensed that not everything was right. His kitchen, the heart of his home for that night, should have been a place of teamwork and respect. Yet, something unseen was breaking the peace there. He didn't show his concern, but his instincts were sharp. He knew the evening might take an unexpected turn. While talking to a guest, Keanu's mind wandered. He remembered many times in his own life when people had treated him poorly or judged him unfairly. Even as a famous actor, he had felt loneliness and sadness. He understood humiliation more than people thought. That was why he was always gentle with strangers. He knew what it was like to be hurt by others' words. As he watched his friends drink and laugh, he promised himself that if something was wrong in his kitchen, he would deal with it quietly, but firmly. For Keanu, his home was not just a place of walls and furniture. It was a place of respect, where no one guest or worker should feel small. He had always believed that true character showed when no cameras were rolling, when the world wasn't watching. That night, he was not an actor, not a movie hero. He was simply a man who wanted peace and kindness under his roof. The laughter grew louder again, and a faint sound from the kitchen caught his attention. A plate clattered, followed by muffled voices. Some guests exchanged glances and smirked. Keanu noticed everything, though he didn't move yet. His dark eyes turned. toward the kitchen door, and he quietly set his glass aside. He felt that soon he would need to stand up not as a host's entertaining friends, but as a man protecting the dignity of someone weaker. The night was still young, but already Keanu knew it would not be an ordinary dinner. Something inside told him that before the evening ended, he would have to remind everyone of what respect truly meant. And while he remained calm on the outside, his heart was preparing for that moment. The dinner was moving forward, and everyone seemed relaxed. The lights were soft, the music was calm, and the smell of food filled the air. Keanu Reeves sat among his guests, listening to their stories and laughing gently at their jokes. From the outside, it looked like a perfect evening. But inside, Keanu could sense that something was not right. The mood in the air felt slightly off. It was not loud or obvious, but there was a strange tone that he could not ignore. He noticed the way some of his guests leaned toward each other, whispering while glancing toward the kitchen. A few of them laughed too loudly, not at the jokes being shared at the table, but at something else. Their laughter carried a sharpness that didn't belong in a warm gathering. Keanu, who had always been observant, picked up on it right away. He didn't say anything, but his calm eyes followed their glances. He could tell their attention was not on the food or the conversation, but on something happening behind the kitchen doors. A young kitchen worker rushed out with a tray of glasses. His steps were unsteady, and his hands shook as he tried not to spill. His face looked pale, his eyes fixed on the floor as though he was afraid to meet anyone's gaze. Some of the guests covered their mouths, pretending to hide their laughs, but the smirks on their faces were clear. Keanu saw it all. He greeted the young man with a soft smile and a polite thank you. The worker nodded quickly, almost as if those two words gave him a little courage. Still, Keanu knew the boy was under pressure. Keanu leaned back in his chair, quietly observing. He had been in countless public places where people were rude, where power was shown by embarrassing someone weaker. He hated it every time. To him, respect was not something to give only to those in high positions. Respect was for everyone: the waiter, the cleaner, the driver. And now, inside his own home, he could sense disrespect growing. And that made him uneasy. The laughter grew again, this time louder. Keanu tilted his head slightly, listening closely. The voices came from the kitchen. At first, he heard clattering plates being moved, utensils hitting the counter. Then came voices, one of them sharp and mocking. It wasn't a friendly laugh. It was the kind of laugh meant to make someone feel small. Keanu's jaw tightened slightly, though he kept his calm expression. One guest near him chuckled and whispered to another, "You should have seen it." They laughed, shaking their heads as if they had witnessed something amusing. Keanu didn't interrupt, but his heart grew heavier. He had a strong sense that one of the workers was being treated unfairly, maybe even bullied, right there in his kitchen. To most people, it might have seemed like nothing. Just laughter, just jokes, nothing serious. But Keanu knew better. He knew how dangerous small humiliations could be. They could destroy a person's confidence. They could make someone feel worthless. And he could not stand the idea that this was happening in a place where he had invited people for kindness and warmth. He lifted his glass slowly, pretending to take a sip, but his eyes remained fixed on the kitchen door. His mind was already working. Should he walk in right away? Should he wait and see more? He decided to stay calm for a moment longer. He wanted to be certain before he acted, but inside, he was preparing himself. If what he suspected was true, he would not stay silent. The strange tone in the air grew heavier for him. Every time someone laughed too loudly, Keanu's ears caught the faint sound of unease behind it. He looked at the faces of his guests, some genuinely enjoying the evening, but a few carrying smirks that didn't belong in a home built on respect. His instincts sharpened. He knew he would soon discover the truth. Then the moment came. The kitchen door swung open again, and the same young worker came out, this time with a plate of appetizers. His hand shook, and one small piece nearly slipped from the tray. A quiet laugh escaped from one of the guests at the table. The boy's face turned red, but he kept moving, placing the food gently on the table. Keanu's eyes followed him. The boy's shoulders looked heavy. As if he was carrying more than just the tray, he was carrying shame. Keanu gave him another warm thank you. The boy looked up briefly, his lips trembling as if he wanted to smile. But then he lowered his eyes quickly and rushed back into the kitchen. And just as the door closed, Keanu caught it again, the cruel laughter, louder this time. His heart sank. He knew for sure now. Someone inside that kitchen was humiliating the boy. Keanu set his glass down carefully. Outwardly, he remained calm, but inside, his patience was ending. He didn't like confrontation, but he liked cruelty even less. The strange tone in the air had revealed its truth. His home, his kitchen, a place that should have been filled with respect, was being poisoned with humiliation. And Keanu Reeves was not going to let it continue. Keanu Reeves had already sensed something was wrong. But when the sound of cruel laughter reached his ears again, he knew he could no longer stay in his chair. His guests were busy chatting, sipping wine, and smiling at each other, but Keanu's attention was on the kitchen door. He rose quietly, not drawing too much attention, and walked toward the sound. His steps were calm, steady, but inside, his heart was heavy with disappointment. This was his home. No one was supposed to feel humiliated here as he neared the kitchen. The voices became clearer. He heard a man's loud, mocking tone cutting through the softer clatter of dishes. "Look at you," the man sneered, his voice sharp. "Can't even carry a tray without spilling. What are you good for?" Then came another round of laughter, the kind that hurts more than any slap. Keanu's brows tightened as he pushed. The kitchen door slightly open. What he saw made his chest ache. In the middle of the kitchen stood the young worker he had noticed earlier, the one with trembling hands. His eyes were downcast, his face red with shame, and his whole body looked smaller, as if he wanted to disappear. Beside him, towering with pride, was another worker, a man with a smirk on his face. This man was the source of the cruelty. He mocked the boy for spilling water earlier, raising his voice so that everyone could hear. The other staff looked uncomfortable, but none of them spoke. Some tried to keep working, avoiding the scene, while others forced awkward smiles, unsure what to do. The boy whispered an apology, his voice soft, but the bully only grew louder. "Sorry, that's all you can say. You're pathetic. You don't belong here." His words stabbed like knives. The young worker's eyes glistened, holding back tears, but he remained silent. He was too afraid to defend himself. For him, this job might have meant survival, a chance to earn a living, and losing it could break him. So he stood still, swallowing the humiliation, letting it burn inside. Keanu's heart tightened as he watched. He had seen enough of the world to know what this was, one man trying to feel powerful by crushing someone weaker. And what hurt more was that the guests outside, his own invited friends, had laughed along with this cruelty. They didn't stop it. They didn't question it. They allowed it to spread, as if the shame of one young man was entertainment for them. Keanu stepped into the kitchen quietly. The sound of his footsteps was soft, but the effect was immediate. The staff froze. The bully's smirk faded slightly as he realized who was standing there. The young worker looked up in shock, his face pale. No one had expected the host himself, the Hollywood star, to walk in at that exact moment. Keanu didn't speak right away. He just looked at the scene before him, his eyes calm but sharp. He took in the way the bully stood proudly, and the way The young worker kept his head down. The silence grew heavy. Even the clattering of dishes stopped. The young worker tried to straighten himself, whispering again, "I'm sorry, sir." His voice cracked, trembling under the weight of embarrassment. Keanu's gaze softened toward him, offering silent reassurance. But then his eyes shifted back to the man responsible. And in that shift, the warmth in his face disappeared. The bully cleared his throat and tried to laugh nervously. "Just a little fun," he said, waving his hand as if to dismiss the cruelty. No harm done, but Keanu knew better. He had been humiliated before in his own life. He knew the deep wound such moments left behind. He could see it in the boy's eyes, the pain, the loss of dignity. And in that moment, Keanu made a decision. He didn't raise his voice, because he didn't need to. His presence alone filled the room with authority. He walked over and placed a gentle hand on the young worker's shoulder, steadying him. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. His tone was filled with genuine care. The boy nodded quickly, though his eyes betrayed the truth. He wasn't all right. But the fact that Keanu had noticed that he had cared enough to ask already gave him a small piece of strength back. Keanu turned slowly toward the man who had mocked him. His eyes, usually so calm and kind, now carried steel. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. He simply asked, "Why?" A single word hung in the air like thunder. The bully shifted uncomfortably, his smirk gone. He tried to laugh again, but his voice cracked. "It was just a joke," he muttered. But Keanu's silence crushed the excuse. The staff watched in awe. They had seen rich men ignore such things, or even encourage them. But here was Keanu Reeves, standing in his own kitchen, defending the dignity of the youngest, weakest worker. The boy stood a little taller now, not because his shame was gone, but because someone powerful had chosen to stand beside him. In that moment, Keanu knew what he had to do. This wasn't just about one spilled tray or one cruel man. It was about respect. It was about the kind of world he wanted inside his home. He couldn't allow humiliation to live here, not under his roof. And as the bully shifted, waiting for Keanu's response, the air grew heavier. Everyone in that kitchen, even those outside laughing earlier, would soon understand what it meant when a man of quiet strength decided to act. Keanu Reeves stood quietly in his own kitchen. The room had fallen into complete silence, but inside, it carried the weight of shame and fear. Everyone there was waiting to see what he would do. The bully still tried to look confident, though his eyes gave him away. The young worker, humiliated and red-faced, kept his head low, afraid even to breathe too loudly. The other kitchen staff were frozen, unsure whether to keep working or to watch. It was a tense moment, and Keanu did not rush it. He stood with his hands calm by his side, his posture straight, and his gaze steady. For a long moment, he did not say anything. He simply observed. He looked at the young man's trembling hands. He saw how the boy's shoulders curled inward, as if trying to make himself invisible. He noticed the way the bully had puffed out. His chest earlier but was now shrinking slightly under the weight of silence. Keanu read the room without a word, and in that silence, he allowed everyone to feel the ugliness of what had happened. Keanu had always believed silence could be powerful. Sometimes it spoke louder than shouting. His eyes moved slowly from the boy to the man who had mocked him. The bully shifted uneasily, trying to smile, but it came out nervous and weak. He muttered something like, "It wasn't serious, just a laugh." But his voice broke off when he saw that Keanu was not smiling. Keanu walked closer to the boy, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. The young worker flinched at first, surprised by the kindness, but then he relaxed a little under the touch. Keanu leaned down slightly and asked softly, "Are you okay?" His voice was calm, almost whisper-like, but it was filled with warmth. The boy nodded quickly, Even though the answer was clear in his eyes, he was not okay. He had been humiliated. In front of his coworkers and even some guests outside. But that simple question, that concern from Keanu himself, gave him something he had lost: dignity. The bully's face turned red. He tried to break the silence with another excuse. "You know how it is, boss," he said, chuckling nervously. "These new kids can't handle the pressure. I was just showing him how it's done." His voice was forced, his words desperate. But Keanu did not even turn to look at him yet. Instead, he kept his hand on the boy's shoulder a little longer, making sure he felt supported. Only then did Keanu finally shift his gaze toward the bully. The room grew colder. Keanu's expression was calm, but his eyes were sharp, like steel. He didn't shout, he didn't move aggressively. But the weight of his presence alone was enough to make the bully lower his eyes. "Why here?" Keanu asked finally, his voice low but cutting. "Why in my home?" The question struck harder than any loud anger could. The bully stammered, looking around for support, but none of the other staff dared to back him. They had all seen the cruelty, and now they were watching the consequences unfold. The young boy lifted his eyes slightly, just enough to see that. The man who had mocked him no longer looked so powerful. Keanu did not rush. He let the silence linger again, forcing the bully to sit in the weight of his own actions. He wanted him to feel the shame he had poured onto someone else. Then Keanu spoke again, slowly. "I don't allow this. Not here. Not anywhere." The bully opened his mouth as if to argue, but Keanu raised his hand slightly, stopping him before he could speak. His calmness made the words stronger. "Respect," Keanu said firmly, "is not a choice. It is the rule." His words carried no anger, but the authority in them was undeniable. Everyone in the room knew he meant it. The boy blinked rapidly, his eyes wet. For the first time that evening, he stood a little straighter. He hadn't defended himself earlier because he thought no one would stand for him. But now, with Keanu by his side, he no longer felt completely alone. Keanu finally released the boy's shoulder and took a step back, but his eyes never left the bully. He could see the man shrinking, no longer puffed with pride, no longer smirking. Keanu had seen this kind of person before, someone who tried to feel big by making others small. He despised it, not with hatred, but with deep disappointment. He turned his attention briefly to the rest of the staff. His expression softened, and he gave them a small nod, as if to reassure them. They understood. They had just seen a clear long row B. They had just seen a clear long last. We had seen long last collided savoury, and life's last clost, long-lasting color. His express, long-lasting color. We need to be long-lasting Nate. As they respass with some of the lies Khalid, why sev? Why sev 8? We lie sip. We sa why, by, we sabat akad, by my lad. Padad I L sakai koix kakli lisaka I susai kabat sai sik had by lights stick we get to pite I resis it I sis it ga sik las abak I think pity I guess kafaka good day the statistics was the basis of that and it is example of who Keanu Reeves really was, not just a famous actor, but a man who valued dignity above everything else. The bully tried once more, his voice shaky. "It was just a mistake," he said, almost pleading. But Keanu didn't let him escape with excuses. His eyes hardened again, and he answered simply, "No." It was a choice. Those words ended the conversation. Everyone understood. The young boy's humiliation had not been an accident. It had been deliberate. And Keanu Reeves, quiet and calm, had exposed the truth without shouting a single insult. The kitchen was silent again, But this time, it was different. The silence was no longer filled with cruelty. It was filled with respect for Keanu, for his principles, and for the young man who had been defended. The bully stood awkwardly, his confidence broken, waiting for what would come next, and as Keanu slowly turned back toward the boy. The guests outside continued laughing and talking, not yet knowing that in the kitchen, a moment of truth had just begun. Keanu Reeves stood in the middle of his kitchen, and the air around him was heavy with silence. The bully lowered his eyes, trying to hide the nervousness now building inside him. The young worker still stood stiff and embarrassed, but there was a faint change in his posture. For the first time that night, someone had cared about him, and that someone was Keanu himself. Keanu didn't believe in shouting to prove his point. He believed in kindness, even when standing against cruelty. He turned toward the boy again, his voice calm, warm, almost like a father speaking to a child. "Are you hurt?" he asked gently. His words were simple, but they carried so much weight. The young worker shook his head quickly, though his voice trembled as he whispered, "No, sir, I'm fine." But anyone looking at him could tell he was not fine. His eyes were red, his hands still shaking, and his chest rose and fell with nervous breaths. Keanu gave a small nod, showing that he respected the boy's answer, even if he knew it wasn't the full truth. He didn't want to embarrass him further by pushing him to admit his pain. Instead, Keanu's kindness was in his actions. He reached for a clean towel lying on the counter and handed it to the boy. "Take a breath," he said softly. The boy hesitated, then slowly took the towel, holding it tightly in his hands as if it was more than just cloth. It was a gesture that told him he mattered. The room remained silent as everyone watched. For many of the staff, this was something they had never seen before. A man of fame and wealth, a man who could have ignored the situation completely, was instead giving his full attention to the youngest worker in the room. He wasn't acting like a boss. He wasn't acting like a movie star. He was acting like a human being who valued another human being. The young worker's lips trembled as he tried to speak. "I'm sorry for the mistake, sir," he whispered. His eyes lowered again, ashamed of spilling water earlier. Keanu's expression softened even more. He shook his head lightly. "A mistake," Keanu said, "is nothing to be ashamed of. Everyone makes them. What matters is how we treat each other after." Those words pierced through the silence. The boy's eyes widened slightly, and for the first time, he allowed himself to look at Keanu directly. There was no anger there, no disappointment, only reassurance. That simple truth gave the boy more comfort than he could put into words. Keanu then glanced around at the rest of the kitchen staff. "He doesn't stand alone," Keanu said firmly, his calm voice filling the room. "Every one of you works hard tonight. I see it, and I appreciate it. I will not have anyone here disrespected." His words were not loud, but they carried authority, the kind that comes not from power, but from honesty. The young worker swallowed hard, his throat tight with emotion. He had never expected someone like Keanu Reeves to defend him. He had walked into the evening afraid of making mistakes, afraid of being seen as weak. Now, standing in front of him, Keanu had given him something no one else had offered him that night: respect. The bully shifted uncomfortably, clearly angry, but too afraid to speak. He could feel the balance in the room had shifted. He was no longer the center of attention. His power, built on mocking others, had been taken away in a matter of minutes. And it was taken away not by shouting, but by kindness. The boy held the towel tightly, and his shoulders lifted just a little higher. For the first time that evening, he felt like he wasn't invisible. Keanu's hand had rested on his shoulder earlier, and those few seconds had given him more strength than the bully's loud words had taken away. Now, with Keanu's gentle reassurance, he began to believe he was worth more than the humiliation he had endured. The kitchen staff exchanged glances, many of them deeply moved. They had seen other homes, other rich families, where staff were treated like shadows present, but ignored. But Keanu was different. He had stepped into the middle of their world and shown that even the smallest mistake did not erase someone's worth. Keanu stood quietly again, his presence filling the room. He knew the boy would remember this moment for the rest of his life. It wasn't just about stopping cruelty. It was about replacing it with kindness. He wanted the boy to walk away from this night, not broken, but stronger. The boy finally whispered, his voice unsteady, "Thank you, sir." Those two words carried all the gratitude he couldn't fully express. Keanu gave him the smallest smile, the kind that said, "You don't need to thank me. It's just what's right." Then, turning his eyes once more toward the bully, Keanu's face hardened slightly. The kindness he had shown the boy did not extend to cruelty. The man who had caused the humiliation still stood there, waiting, uncertain of what Keanu would do. The silence grew heavier again, but this time, everyone knew the kindness had already been given to the right person. Now, it was time for justice. And as Keanu's gaze lingered on the bully, the young boy behind him stood a little taller, holding on tightly to the towel in his hands. No longer trembling as he had before. The kitchen was still and tense. The young worker stood with a towel in his hand, holding on to the little piece of dignity that Keanu Reeves had just given him. But across the room, the bully shifted from one foot to the other, his false confidence breaking apart. He had mocked the boy to make himself look stronger, but now he was the one being silently judged. And Keanu, calm but firm, turned his full attention toward him. Keanu did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. His presence was enough to quiet the room. He took a slow step forward, his dark eyes fixed on the man. "Tell me," Keanu said softly, "what did you gain from this?" His voice was low, but it carried a weight that made everyone listen. The bully's lips parted, but no words came out. He looked around, as if searching for support, but none of the staff dared to meet his eyes. They had seen the cruelty. They had seen the boy's humiliation. No one was going to defend him now. Keanu continued, his tone calm, almost disappointed. "You had a choice. You could have helped him. Instead, you laughed at him. You tore him down in front of everyone." Why? His words were not shouted yet. They hit harder than anger ever could. The bully forced a nervous laugh. It was just a joke. "I didn't mean anything by it," he muttered, trying to sound casual. But Keanu's eyes stayed locked on him, steady, unwavering. "A joke." Keanu repeated quietly. "A joke should make people smile." This didn't make him smile. It made him small. "Do you think that's funny?" The man's face turned red. He tried to look brave, but his voice betrayed him. "I didn't it, wasn't?" Serious. Keanu's hand lifted slightly, silencing him. It was serious to him, Keanu said firmly. "Look at him." He nodded toward the boy, who stood frozen, his eyes lowered again. "Do you see his face? Do you see his hands still shaking?" "That's not nothing. That's the result of your words." The bully's mouth opened again, but no answer came. He looked at the boy, then quickly looked away. A shame-taught Keanu took another step closer, his calm voice growing sharper. "Respect," he said, "is the first thing that should be served in a kitchen. Before the food, before the wine, respect comes first. Without it, everything else is poisoned." The staff listened, their hearts pounding. Some had tears in their eyes. They knew Keanu was right. They knew the truth of his words. And though he wasn't speaking to them, his message was one they would carry forever. Keanu turned his head slightly, his eyes narrowing. "You thought no one would notice, but I noticed. This is my home, and in my home, no one is treated this way." The bully swallowed hard, his throat dry. I didn't mean he began, but Keanu cut him off with just one look. The calmness in his expression was gone now. His voice, though still steady, carried finality. "You don't belong here," Keanu said simply. The room froze. The words were quiet, but they echoed like thunder. The bully blinked, stunned. "What? What do you mean?" "Huh?" he asked, his voice shaking. "You're done," Keanu replied. "Your services are no longer needed." He didn't yell. He didn't insult. He simply ended it, like closing a book. His decision was final, and no one doubted it. The man's face turned pale. He tried to protest, raising his hands. "Wait, I need this job." Keanu's expression didn't change. "You should have thought of that before you chose cruelty," he said coldly. "I will not have you working under my roof." Not tonight. Not ever. The staff exchanged looks of shock. They had expected Keanu to defend the boy, but to actually fire the bully on the spot. This showed just how serious he was. He wasn't making a speech for show. He was acting right there, without hesitation. The bully tried again, his voice desperate now. "Please, Mr. Reeves, it won't happen again. I'll be better, I promise." But Keanu shook his head once, slow and firm. "No," he said. "Respect is not something you practice only when someone is watching. It has to be who you are. And you showed me who you are tonight." The silence in the room was heavy, but it was no longer uncomfortable. It was filled with justice. Everyone knew Keanu was right. He turned slightly toward the door, then looked back at the staff. "Have him leave," he said simply. To security. Men who had been standing near the hallway stepped inside. They didn't need further instructions. The bully lowered his head, his pride shattered, and allowed himself to be led out. The young worker stood in disbelief, watching as the man who had mocked him only minutes ago was now being escorted out of the house. His heart pounded. He had expected to carry that humiliation home, maybe cry alone after his shift. Instead, someone had stood up for him, someone powerful. Someone who didn't have to. Keanu turned back to the boy once more, his voice soft again. "You don't need to be afraid anymore," he said. "You belong here. You're part of this night. Hold your head high." The boy's lips trembled, but he managed a small nod. For the first time that evening, he felt seen, respected, even safe. And while the rest of the staff returned quietly to their work, the boy held on to those words. He knew he would never forget them. And as Keanu stepped back toward the dining room, his guests still laughing and talking, the boy realized that true greatness wasn't in fame or wealth, it was in the way someone used their power to protect others. The kitchen door opened, and everyone outside turned their heads. The guests had been laughing moments before, sipping wine and trading jokes. But the sudden, quiet footsteps of Keanu Reeves pulled their attention. He walked out with a calm expression, but there was a weight in his eyes that made the room fall silent. Behind him, 2 security men were leading out the bully, the worker who had mocked and humiliated the young boy. The bully tried to keep his head up, but the shame on his face was clear. He muttered something under his breath, maybe an excuse, maybe a plea, but no one paid attention. The guests who had earlier smirked at the cruel scene now shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some looked down at their glasses, embarrassed. Others exchanged quick glances, wondering what Keanu would do next. Keanu didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He stopped in the middle of the room, his tall frame commanding attention without effort. The bully tried one last time to speak. "Please, Mr. Reeves. It was just a misunderstanding. I didn't mean anything." His voice cracked, and he looked desperate now. Keanu turned his head slowly, his calm gaze landing on him like a heavy stone. "No," he said, his voice low and steady. It was not a misunderstanding. It was a choice, and you made the wrong one. The words hit harder than a shout. The guests looked at each other nervously, and the security men began to escort the bully toward the front door. He struggled slightly, trying to argue, but Keanu lifted his hand and stopped him with a single gesture. "Enough," Keanu said firmly. "Leave." The finality in his tone left no space for argument. The man lowered his head, his pride broken, and walked out of the house. The door shut behind him, leaving a silence that seemed to echo through the walls. For a few moments, no one spoke. The guests shifted in their seats, unsure whether to return to laughter or remain quiet. Keanu let the silence linger. He wanted everyone to feel it, to understand the seriousness of what had happened. Then he looked around the table, his voice calm but clear. "In this home," Keanu began, "kindness is not optional. Respect is not optional. If you came here tonight thinking cruelty is entertainment, then you are in the wrong place." The guests lowered their heads. Some blushed with guilt, remembering how they had laughed earlier when the young worker had been mocked. They realized now how wrong it had been. The air was heavy with regret. Keanu didn't let the weight drag on too long. He walked back toward the kitchen and pushed the door open again. Inside, the young worker was still standing in the same spot, gripping the towel like a lifeline. When he saw the bully was gone, his chest rose in a shaky breath. He looked at Keanu with wide eyes, not knowing what to say. Keanu gave him a gentle nod. "It's over," he said softly. "You can breathe now." The boy's lips parted, but his voice broke with emotion. "Thank you, sir," he whispered, tears threatening to fall. He quickly wiped his eyes, ashamed of showing weakness, but Keanu shook his head gently. "There is no shame in feeling," he told him. "There is only shame in cruelty." Those words sank deep into the boy's heart. He would remember them for the rest of his life. Keanu then did something that shocked everyone. He bent down, picked up a cloth from the counter, and knelt to wipe the small water spill that had started. All of this. The guests, watching through the open kitchen door, gasped softly. Here was a world-famous actor, a man of wealth and fame, on his knees cleaning the floor, not because he had to, but because he wanted to show that no task was beneath him. He stood up again, placed the cloth aside, and gave the young worker a reassuring pat on the shoulder. "Go on, Keanu," said kindly. "Do your job with pride. You belong here as much as anyone else." The boy nodded, his eyes shining with gratitude. His shame had been replaced with something new, strength. When Keanu walked back to his guests, the silence continued. This time, it wasn't uncomfortable. It was heavy with respect. The man who had humiliated the worker was gone, but the lesson remained. The guests now understood that kindness wasn't just something Keanu spoke about. It was something he lived by, finally. Keanu sat down at the table again. He picked up his glass, looked around at the guests, and said quietly, "Now, let's eat. And let's do it with respect." His words were simple, but they carried more weight than any speech could. The guests nodded silently, some ashamed. Some moved. Slowly, the conversation began again, but this time it was different. The laughter that returned was softer, kinder, stripped of its cruelty. In the kitchen, the young worker moved with steadier hands. The other staff treated him differently too, their eyes full of quiet admiration. They had seen a boy nearly broken, then lifted back up by the kindness of one man. And though the night continued with food and wine, no one forgot what had happened. The memory of the bully being escorted out, and Keanu's quiet dignity as he defended the boy, stayed with them. It was more than just a dinner. 'Twas a lesson. That evening, in his own kitchen, Keanu Reeves reminded everyone present of a truth too often forgotten. Respect is not something you earn by status or wealthy, is something every human being deserves, no matter who they are. The house was quiet again after the man was taken away. The door had shut behind him, but the echo of what happened remained in everyone's mind. Keanu Reeves stood still for a moment, his glass untouched on the table. He looked at his guests, then toward the kitchen. His heart was heavy, but not with anger, with the sadness that such cruelty had dared to exist in his home. He rose slowly and walked back into the kitchen. The young worker was still there, holding the towel in his hand, his body stiff with nervousness. His eyes flicked up when he saw Keanu return, as if he feared more trouble was coming. But Keanu's face softened, and he gave him a small nod. "You did nothing wrong," he said gently. "Hold your head up." The boy swallowed hard, trying to fight back his emotions. I made a mistake, sir. I spilled." Keanu stopped him with a shake of his head. "We all spill. We all stumble. That doesn't make us less. What makes us less is when we treat each other without dignity." His words were calm, but each one struck deep. The staff listened quietly, some of them blinking away tears. They had worked in many houses before, but never had they seen someone of such wealth speak like this. Then Keanu did something that surprised them all. He bent down again, picked up the cloth, and wiped the last few drops of water from the floor. He moved slowly, without shame, showing that no task was beneath him. The young worker's eyes widened. His hero, a man who starred in blockbusters and traveled the world, was cleaning a spill that others had mocked him for. That moment alone erased much of the shame he had carried. When Keanu stood up, he placed the cloth aside and looked around the kitchen. "This place," he said softly, "should be filled with respect. Without it, nothing else matters. Not the food, not the wine, not even the laughter. Respect is what keeps it whole." The workers nodded silently, their hearts touched. The young boy's shoulders lifted, and he finally looked up without lowering his eyes. His trembling had stopped. Keanu gave him a reassuring smile, then returned to his guests. As he walked back into the dining area, the room grew quiet again. Every eye turned toward him. His guests, who had laughed earlier at the boy's humiliation, now sat uneasy, aware of how shameful their actions had been. Keanu did not scold them harshly. He wasn't a man who needed anger to make his point. He sat back down slowly, looked at each face in turn, and then spoke. "In my home," he said, "we do not laugh at another's pain. We do not find joy in cruelty. That is not who I am, and I cannot allow it here." The guests looked down at their plates, ashamed. Some murmured apologies. One woman whispered, "You're right. We were wrong." Keanu gave a small nod, accepting the words, but not lingering on them. He didn't need long speeches of regret. What he wanted was for the lesson to remain with them. Then, with a deep breath, he lifted his glass. "Tonight," he said, "let's eat, but let's also remember kindness is the only thing worth sharing." The dinner resumed, but the tone had changed completely. The laughter that returned was softer, free of cruelty. Conversations turned warm, respectful, as though everyone understood the weight of what had just happened. The atmosphere felt lighter. Now, as if a storm had passed and the sky had cleared, inside the kitchen, the young worker moved with steadier hands. His fear had faded, replaced by a quiet pride. The other staff treated him differently now, offering small smiles, giving him gentle nods of encouragement. He had been humiliated, yes, but he had also been defended by someone powerful, and that defense had changed everything. For Keanu, the night was not about food or wine. It was about making sure every person under his roof, whether guest or worker, felt respected. He'd lived through enough pain in his own life to know how dangerous cruelty could be. And he had made a choice long ago. Wherever he was, he would never allow cruelty to take root. The guests would never forget that night. They came expecting laughter and entertainment, but they left with something much deeper. They had witnessed a man of fame and fortune stand up for the smallest worker in the room. They had seen kindness in action, not in words, and it had humbled them. By the time the evening ended, the boy had found his courage again. As the guests left one by one, Keanu quietly slipped into the kitchen once more. The boy turned quickly, standing straighter. Keanu placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "You did well. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." The boy's eyes shone with gratitude. He wanted to say more, but the words stuck in his throat. All he could manage was a soft, "Thank you." Keanu gave him one last nod, then walked back out, his simple black shirt blending into the night as he closed the door behind him. That night ended not as just another dinner, but as a lesson that would stay with everyone who was there. For the young worker, it was the night he learned that even in his lowest moment, someone could see his worth. For the guests, it was the night they were reminded that wealth and laughter mean nothing without compassion. And for Keanu Reeves, it was simply another chance to live by the rule he carried in his heart: treat everyone with respect, no matter who they are. And so, in his own kitchen, Keanu turned what could have been a night of shame into a memory of kindness and dignity, one that would never be forgotten.